So yeah, today I'll be talking about the significance of gender in clean and efficient energy consumption. And I am Shaily, and I've been working at CEEW for the past 2.5 years. And most of my work has been on energy access and especially in context of cooking energy and access to energy for livelihoods, and bringing in a gender lens across our work. Um, Okay, somehow it's not moving. Yeah. So CEW is a policy research think tank based out of Delhi, and our work spans across 7 focus areas and 1 Center for Energy Finance. And this, as I mentioned, this is part of the Energy Access team. Um, so when it comes to access to energy for women, there are two broader categories in which you can sort of divide the discussion. Is that the role women's economic or social empowerment plays in driving energy adoption, and the role energy plays in empowering women. And this is how we have broadly looked at the discussion around the intersection for gender and energy. We look at energy access at 3 levels: access to energy at the household. Now, this could be electrical appliances, or even basic access to electricity in India, and clean cooking energy. For productive uses of energy, which would be, for instance, using a solar water pump for your irrigation purposes, which sort of leads to an improvement in your income, or reduction in drudgery. And access to energy in community spaces, be it public spaces or healthcare, for healthcare or for education. Now, across all these categories, the gender roles in the society sort of also mean the differential gender roles in the society also mean that men and women look at energy very differently. So the priorities, the use pattern, the preferences often differ within household, at when it comes to even income generation and even at the community level. To give you an example, when it comes to energy access at the household level, um, so when unelectrified households get an electricity connection for the first time, we see that the first, so if you just have one light bulb, it is often prioritized that lighting within the household will be prioritized in the front porch, which is sort of an area for social interaction. But again, that also becomes an area which is more accessible to male members of the society, or maybe younger females, but and areas like kitchen are not really prioritized when it comes to lighting, especially in households where there is a need to prioritize which area you want to light up. Similarly, even when it comes to productive use of energy, something like a efficient water pump, we often see the discussion around a deployment of solar water pumps, or generally electric run water pumps, for farm-based activities, which have a direct impact on increased income. But we don't really see a lot of discussion about probably getting a water pump in the house or in the community, so that it eases women's burden and drudgery of lifting that water to different places. At communities as well, lighting of public spaces has a much more gendered implication for women, to ease out their mobility and their safety. And this is how most of our work on gender and energy has been structured. Today, I'll speak a little bit about clean cooking energy access, because of its gender implications and dimensions, and a bit about the productive uses of energy. I will try and bring in what policies have done, or how they could do better to look at this aspect as well. So when it comes to access to clean cooking energy, for most of us, LPG cylinders or now a pipe natural gas connection is a very common occurrence in our household, and we often don't think about what could be like really an alternative. I have grown up with an LPG cylinder all my life, but globally, about 4 billion people do not have access to clean cooking fuels, which means they're either they do not have any clean fuels, LPG, PNG, electricity, anything, or they have an LPG cylinder, but they're also using, traditional fuels like cow dung, firewood for their daily meal prep or even non-cooking uses. Now, the problem here is that cooking from traditional fuels has a huge implication on health because of the household air pollution that is caused through the emissions, which globally accounts for almost 4 million premature deaths. And this is primarily among women and children because women are the ones who are cooking, and children often tend to be around the women. In India, over the past 4 years, the government has definitely made huge strides towards improving access to LPG, especially through the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala program, which a lot of you might have in fact seen across petrol pumps, and also one of the flagship programs of the government, right? And while we do see that women are at the center of the scheme. The scheme provides LPG connections to the women. It also has a provision of giving because at each refill you get a subsidy of a certain amount. So even that refill goes into women's bank accounts. But despite that, where the scheme fails to a large extent is understanding this disparity within the household. So broadly as well, if you will look at policies in India, they look at household as a one singular unit. But households don't operate as a singular unit. Every person within the household, based on their gender, their age, or even the gender of their children, make a difference where they stand within the household in terms of agency and decision making. And this gets reflected in access and use of LPG as well. From our primary surveys, we find that only 23% of the LPG using households actually reported women themselves, and this could be any women in the household, any women in the household take the decision on when to order LPG refills. So while collection and preparation of fuel wood was a gendered activity, has been a gendered activity and still is, when it does not require a monetary intervention, the moment something like LPG, which is a clean efficient fuel, comes into the picture, but there is a need to spend certain amount of money, the women's agency in that decision completely reduces. The other aspect that the scheme has not really focused on that much is how women's, even if you give subsidies into the account of women have mobility constraints across India. Now, unless government ensures that the LPG cylinders are available at their doorstep, women are going to be dependent on male members to actually go and procure it, and which eventually adds to their average delay in purchase of refills. And in that period, then they go back to a traditional fuel. So there is a need for policies to account for these differences within the household, how every member is placed within the household, and probably some of the steps that could be taken is just ensure something as simple as ensuring a doorstep delivery will ensure that would be slightly less dependent on male members to at least procure it. So yeah, one aspect of clean cooking that I wanted to discuss was disparities within the household. But while you know within the same household, women are more marginalized than men. The experiences of women across different communities also differ, and this could be based on location. So we see that households who are using only clean fuels, who are not stacking with traditional fuels, there is a definite huge difference between rural and urban. So whether you're in rural areas versus urban areas, your ability to use these fuels differs by quite a lot of margin. Even in urban areas, what is your economic status, what is the household's economic status will definitely define their ability to use clean fuels. And we see that difference very clearly emerging in slum versus non-slum households. Um, Similarly, what is your caste status, which in India, in most cases, will define the economic status of the household, and their ability to purchase and use clean fuels has an impact on whether women have the access to clean cooking fuels like LPG. While policies and clean cooking policies like Ujjwala have definitely given that in their policy design and even implementation have given that focus on how SCST households to get that credit linked free of not it's not actually free of cost, it's credit linked connection to these marginalized households. But then the policy does not really account for how they're going to be able to afford that recurring expenditure of around 900 rupees every 2 months. And also a certain, it's not like all scheduled castes are at the same economic status. So something like slum households are not really prioritized within these policies. It's completely missing. And we in fact we see how despite slum households being slum areas in India comprising of marginalized castes and tribes as the larger proportion, schemes like Ujjwala Yojana have not reached these households at all. Um, so this is broadly the 2 points that I want to make here is that a government and policies being cognizant of the intra-household dynamics, and also outside of the household, the inter-community differences, be it on based on location, based on your socioeconomic conditions. Moving on, I wanted to introduce a little bit about productive uses of energy and where do women come in there. So broadly, we see women in three categories when it comes to productive use of energy. It could be women-led co-founded energy businesses. So it could be maybe a solar rooftop company run by a woman, or a solar milk chiller, or any form of energy efficient technology that a company is producing, and it's co-founded or run by women. Women as employees in the energy sector, they could be employed in any of these energy companies. And the third, which is women as end users of these energy efficient products in their business, so which is leading to some kind of income generation or improved incomes. Most of our work has focused on the third category of women as end users. Um, and this has primarily been because of the research that we did a few years ago, which sort of told us that lack of reliable electricity is actually the biggest bottleneck for 4.3 million micro enterprises in India. And this is also the right time to talk about it, because a lot of the discussions about energy access or access to clean and efficient energy has been very limited to the household space currently in India. And this lack of mechanization definitely constrains both men and women, in fact, to operate at lower levels of productivity and higher levels of drudgery, which does lead to income and time poverty. But for women, there definitely comes a double burden. There is also this aspect of most non-mechanized tasks being women's job. And given that they're having to spend at so much of additional time in household chores, because time use is always a constraint for women. Mechanization through efficient energy products in their businesses does have a greater implication for women, especially women-owned micro enterprises. So one of the some of the key things that I wanted to discuss here was how can energy products, the manufacturers of energy products, be cognizant of women's needs in businesses as well, and what are like some of the broader points that they should be looking at. Um, the first is the product design. Having a women friendly design or recognizing the need that women have from a certain product is fairly important. For example, we were once talking to an organization which manufactures agro processing units in terms of millet processing units. And they were telling us about how their design somehow needs people to climb up on a certain platform and lift the millets to get it processed into the machine. But this is something that they found that women users were not able to, they were not very comfortable doing that. And it was causing an inconvenience to them, or at times also dependency on a male member to actually lift something heavy. So being cognizant of these things and incorporating that in your product design in a way that it becomes easy to use for both men and women. I mean, if you make your product design inclusive, it's not like it's going to harm men in a way. Um, so one first would be that. Second, we also see these energy businesses, the need to modify or change a business model in a way that it benefits women. One of the examples could be after sales servicing, which is an important component every time we talk about energy efficient or clean energy appliances, because it's a new technology, right? So your local technician in a rural area might not really be may not really know how to fix something like a solar powered sewing machine if there's something wrong with the the solar aspect of it. So having reliable, providing that reliable after sales service, and probably closer to the customer at the doorstep if possible, but closer to the customer, is fairly important and makes it easier for women to use these appliances in the long term. And also including some kind of gender smart messaging. So what we see is like a lot of products like in the agro processing units as well, are maybe they are being purchased by men, but eventually they get used by women's self-help groups. But the way these products are being marketed, it seems like only men are using it. So probably including that kind of messaging when you're marketing, when you're talking about your products, or on how it could benefit women's businesses as well, could be one of the aspects. The third and probably the most important is end user financing. Efficiency and clean energy comes at a higher cost, at least at the upfront cost. In the later stages, the recurring expenses definitely reduces, but that high upfront cost acts as a deterrent for both men and women. Um, but it becomes an additional problem for women because access to finance is definitely a well-known issue, which is far more for women than for men. So enabling that bank loans, often energy enterprises tie up with small finance banks or microfinance banks to provide probably a flexible repayment option, or a rental model, or a pay-as-you-go model, which is something that women find it easier to afford and pay for. Um, Moving on. This is my sort of my last slide. So I also wanted to, after talking about these two broader categories, I also wanted to talk about what the current policy ecosystem looks like for enabling women in using efficient energy. So when we mapped the policies across sectors, if you look at, so there are schemes across sectors, which would be for livelihoods and MSME, health, anything, which have a very limited focus on energy. Uh, and there are also schemes on with a focus on women. Again, they have a very limited focus on energy. To give you an example, for instance, Mudra as a loan. when it was launched for small enterprises. It has a focus on enabling it for women because it provides collateral free loans. But if you look at the kind of services covered into it, while it does not explicitly exclude energy, it also does not include energy efficient appliances. There's no really not a lot of there's no as such mention of that, and this sort of is similar in most MSME schemes that we come across. And then there are schemes that focus on clean energy, something like Kusum scheme, which makes it which subsidizes the cost of solar water pumps for farmers. But then they don't really have a focus on women. And energy schemes focus on women only when it is cooking energy. It does not go in terms of electricity access or in terms of access to energy for livelihood purposes. And broadly, we also see that the policies in the country are, if you divide it into four categories, most of them fall under that gender neutral or gender targeted um, area. Most policies don't really move to a gender transformative lens. For instance, the Ujjwala Yojana, while women are at the center of the scheme, there's also a constant re in, sort of a reinstating the fact that cooking is a gendered activity. The messaging throughout the scheme has been, if you look at the posters, the banners, or all sorts of messaging have just had like a woman talking about cooking. There's no mention of men could also, like, okay, this is an efficient energy appliance, efficient cooking, so why not include more, why not make it, involve men in cooking as well. So that's broadly where most of the policies lie. So one of the key takeaways that I would like to communicate here is that energy sector policies are not really gender sensitive. And when it comes to gender specific policies which are targeted on women, they don't have a energy lens. Again, an example could be something like a scheme on maternity, like institutional births, like Janani Suraksha Yojana. Now, or government has other schemes like Pradhan Mantri Matru Bandhana Yojana, which also provides a cash-based subsidy, cash-based support to pregnant women for nutrition. But probably adding an element of giving some additional monetary support during that pregnancy and early childbirth for the household to be able to afford an LPG cylinder during that period could definitely and could definitely reduce health impacts. And it has been proven in literature that how pregnant women and early during the newborn babies, when they are born, there is a huge impact of emissions from burning of traditional fuels for cooking. But most gender specific policies do not really have an energy lens. So there is definitely a need of clean energy schemes to be integrated across different sectors of health, livelihoods, um, or even education for that matter. Um, the the 2 points that I would like to highlight here would be that there is a need to build an ecosystem in the energy space for gender disaggregated data and gender responsive budgeting. With So the first, in terms of gender disaggregated data, we see that currently most of the data which is being collected on energy at the household level, it comes from the household head. In fact, only last year, CEEW did a survey on cooking energy access, where our respondent was only the primary cook, which eventually mostly becomes in 99% of the cases women. Where you need to capture women's perspectives. We also did a survey on gender perception around energy within the household with both men and women. So this disaggregated data on women's needs, priorities, use, it's completely missing from the space right now, and there is definitely a need to push for that. Uh, Not just at non-profits and outside of the government, but also within the government. And the second on gender responsive budgeting for energy access. We see that the government of India has a mandate for gender budgeting, and it has been around for quite some time, since 2005. But most ministries who actually report any sort of expenditure on that are primarily women and child development, rural development. Uh, e- in fact, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas (MOPNG), which looks after the Ujjwala scheme, is one of the ministries in the energy space that has actually reported under gender budgeting. But not ministries like Ministry of Power or Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. These core energy ministries are not really looking at gender in a more mainstreamed manner, and we do think that gender budgeting for the energy ministries could be something that should be taken up, and this is something that we are currently working on to take up with the government. So yeah, I think that's broadly what I wanted to talk about, and I would be happy to take questions. I'll just stop sharing so I can see. Yeah.
Great session. Shaily, we do have questions for you. So if you can see it in the chat section, or I can read them out for you if you want me to. One question is a very interesting take on what Akshat asks about the Ujjwala scheme and schemes like these, and how the success of such schemes, it hinges on the places of women in the Indian society. And thus, what you were discussing, that till the time agency, women's agency or gender empowerment in general, it will impact the kind of success these policies will achieve, and hence to that, till that is achieved, it will be limited. So, what's your take on that? Another question is, in case of specific policies targeted for women, is there anything else that you think that can be done except the monetary support, as you mentioned? And here this person talks about in terms of, for example, Janani Suraksha Yojana. So what else can we do other than monetary support to ensure that policies they have the results that we seek?
Sure. Thank you, Tanya. I think Akshat, fair point. I completely agree, and which is what I was trying to say, that even the policies which have had women at the center are not really looking at it from a transformative lens, and they are sort of reinstating the biases and the structures of the society. And this is also the narrative that we often see when it comes to clean cooking, that the overall narrative has often been like, women will free up time. So if they will free up time, they will be able to use that time to spend more time with their children, or use that time to do other household tasks. Or and personally I feel, even when people say that women freeing up their time will be able to put that into income generating activity, and then you use that money to pay for LPG refill, is also something a little off, because this is clean cooking is something that impacts everyone in your household, right? So that should be a household priority, and that it shouldn't be like women having to pay for that refill, and get that income to pay for that. One is that, and I think Udipta, if I hope
Yes.
I'm pronouncing it correctly, Udipta's question. So definitely there's one aspect of monetary support. Another aspect is also, there are some research organizations who have also done pilots around providing free of cost cylinders during pregnancy, or during childbirth. While I would say, I would also like to point this out, that we should also not connect women's health only and prioritize that only when they're giving birth. It should move beyond that. So something like the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which has a specific component of the construction of toilets. It also has a section on building a kitchen, but probably including something like, you're getting a LPG cylinder along with when you're building your house, if you already don't have it. Or also mandating something like building a kitchen slab, or building a kitchen chimney in the kitchen, so that even if you're using solid fuels, the fumes are not are relatively lower, and the household air pollution can be somehow maintained. Um, can yeah, in fact, one of the studies that we initially did was on women employees in the rooftop solar sector in India. So if you look at if you look at globally, the women's employment in the clean energy sector is much higher. It's around 33%, which is if you compare it with conventional energy sectors, it's again much higher, because conventional oil and petroleum and natural gas have less than 10% of women. And because clean energy as a space does provide those opportunities for women, more women are coming into the sector. And definitely the employment in the space does provide a platform for more gender inclusion, and it can be brought in. But we also know, we need to look at, when we talk about productive uses of energy, like I mentioned, there are three aspects of it broadly. So it can't just be women being employed, but we also need to look at women in who are running micro businesses, or also women who are actually innovators and co-founders of startups, and leading these, actually making these technologies. So my opinion would be that it needs to be across the value chain, not just at one point of the value chain. I think there's one more. Yes, definitely. A lot of times, policy design does account for it, but implementation procedures often are lacking. And I would like to point out that the government has tried to do a lot of these. Like, for instance, an example of a bottom-up approach would be how government was holding LPG panchayats across different areas, especially rural areas, where they were bringing a lot of these women together, and this was being implemented by um, uh, local partners and NGOs who already had a presence in the area, to talk about the awareness of what are the health impacts. Why should you be investing in an LPG refill? And which has sort of worked, because there's also a peer influence, because okay, my neighbor is using it and she's finding it nice, so maybe it is worth the money. But again, there, a major criticism that we usually point out is that the LPG panchayats were a woman only space. So unless you bring men into that conversation, because like we saw, ultimately men are often controlling the money in the household. Maybe even if women are completely on board because of the community awareness, they might not be able to implement that in the household and actually purchase that. So bottom up does work, and ground level work, working at the ground level with the communities does have an impact.
Okay, so if someone else, if guys, if you have any other questions, you can ask them right away. Sharing in the meanwhile, I have a little question of my own that I was curious about. Since you have gone on field and there's a lot of research data that you guys have explored, I wanted to understand when it comes to energy efficiency, and since women's agency and their ability to use the finances of the household plays a major role in this way, have the SDGs and what role can they play in this area? Has that been explored anywhere in India? Because generally we see that we have used SDGs for increasing financial inclusion in different aspects of the household, or women's independence in terms of small businesses. So when it comes to energy efficiency at the household level, is there some model? I don't have a clear picture in my head, but I'm thinking in terms of whether it's the awareness at a community level or whether at a group level, a women can do something. Has SDG's role at all in this respect been explored anywhere in India, or is there? Do you think there's a possibility for that?
No, you're very on point. It actually has been. And I'd answered it in two parts. One on clean cooking aspect. In fact, SRLMs in Bihar and Odisha, if I'm not incorrect, yeah, Bihar and Odisha, I think, have tried these models of where SGs can give that financing for those refills. They've also tried it out in terms of using the SG networks to do the distribution at the last mile, and also awareness and bringing that community level awareness and push for using clean cooking. In fact, the ministry is trying to do a pilot in Odisha or on Ujwala Didis, which is where you're attaching these self-help group members with the distributors, and they are acting like your last mile agents who are reminding households that, oh, that your refill is going to be over in a couple of weeks. Do you want to buy another one? So give that nudge to the households, and this is something that the government is also exploring, and it has happened in a couple of states. The second part would be on the productive use of energy, whether energy efficient appliances have been adopted in businesses. So the NRETP, the National Rural Employment Transformation Project, I think, yeah, NRETP under NRLM has components in the policy on inclusion of energy efficient technologies in women's livelihoods, and they do have it at the policy level, and at this point they're exploring with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy on how these kind of technologies can be deployed at the SG level, and some I think Madhya Pradesh SRLM has been working on this for, I think, for with some one-off pilots with some NGOs on different products, but at the central level, that's also been in talks.
Okay.